In this video, I want to introduce some basic facts and information about migration patterns in 2022 as well as in recent years. The goal of all these statistics are to give us a context, a common language about the driving forces and the characteristics of migration around the world in 2022, as well as where we've come from in the last decade or two, to kind of understand who's migrating, so that in the next video, the subsequent videos, we can understand when we're starting to theorize about why people migrate, how many of those people that we're going to be describing now might fit those theoretical models. So the takeaways from all these statistics, most of them come from the International Organization of Migration, for Migration, that are tasked with trying to help migrants and have offices around the world, and they've gathered some really interesting statistics on human trafficking that I use for my own research. And you can screenshot these, you can pause the video and take a look at them in more detail. I include the visuals because I think some people enjoy listening or understand when people tell them specific information. Some do when they read the readings for the class, which I'll put all in the description of the video, when trying to understand a specific outcome or cause for a specific form of political violence that we care about, and others enjoy pictures, and so I'm trying to merge them all together. You can pause any of these and take a look at them in more detail. The IOM reports, most of the data today are from the 2022 report. I also have a few from the 2020 because the graphics differ, and it's useful, I think, to try to visualize the differences and the trends over time, because in this class, one of the main themes is, do we try to understand where things are now and the differences cross-sectionally across countries, or do we try to understand change, how things have changed both within countries as well as across countries? And the takeaway is that the number of people migrating has increased until, of course, the interregnum period of the COVID pandemic. The average migrant is more likely to be male than female. 52% are male and 48% are female. And as of 2019, 1 out of every 30 people is an international migrant. 272 billion people, so 1/4 of a billion people. And where they are, of course, varies significantly according to how large the population is in the destination state. We see the UAE, a very dramatic high percentage of the population, same with Saudi Arabia, is from outside the country. Switzerland as well. Australia is definitely up there. Singapore, 37%. Qatar has almost 79%. So you see some countries have quite high levels of migration. Others, even developed countries like Japan, has dramatically lower levels. For the more recent trends from that report, as I mentioned, the top 20 destinations are on the left, and where they come from are on the right. As I mentioned in the previous video, this kind of gives the scale of the difference between the different countries, how many more people go to the US as opposed to any other developed country. You have well over double in the US, and the next highest country of Germany. Saudi Arabia. Australia is down there, slightly below Canada. But you see also the destination countries are pretty similar to what we saw with the previous video. I think what's really interesting that we haven't talked about yet is the gender differences across region. I mentioned that 52% of migrants were male and 48% were female. I think they only did measure those two genders, but where people go as a percentage of male and female is quite different if you're going to North America or Europe as opposed to the Middle East, right? Where you had a lot of migrants going to, though the vast majority, as you can see on the top, are male instead of female. and that there is gendered differences across regions. And there are a lot of connections to the themes of the class of natural disasters, which we're going to see in a couple weeks, conflict, which we've seen so far, the economic and political drivers of conflict. This also has effects that we haven't really talked about, the endogeneity between conflict and political and social factors we have talked about, but that you see displacements due to conflict kind of ebb and flow, but see relatively consistent. But those by disasters can vary quite dramatically, like in 2010, 2016, and 2020. And where these people actually go is also interesting to see the regional clustering of a lot of people who are displaced either due to conflict, which is those orange or yellow dots on the top, and the blue ones down in the bottom. You see, I think, more conflict clustering in certain areas like the Philippines, Myanmar, India, a large swath of sub-Saharan Africa, Israel, Lebanon, Syria, and the disasters kind of hit a lot more broadly, including in Australia as well. Unfortunately, there has been a number of instances of migrants dying on the way towards their destination. It's something that I think has fallen out of the headlines, at least in Australia and the US, in the news sources that I follow. But back when the initial spike of migration in 2015 to Europe, in which you did have a lot of people trying to cross by boats across the Mediterranean to escape the Syrian conflict or the Afghan conflict, and other ones in northern Africa, you see boats capsizing and a large number of migrant deaths. Thankfully, 2020, the last date that they did have available, while still the majority of people died crossing the Mediterranean, African crossing being the second deadliest, that is down from previous years. And I think there's a number of other reasons why things might have also gone down and might continue to go down in the 2021 statistics, and that because of the coronavirus pandemic. The latest report has some interesting graphs and articles talking about the effect of COVID restrictions, as well as the policies that different countries passed related to the COVID pandemic. I think there's been a lot of good research coming out about the epidemiology and the social and health costs of the pandemic. I think there's been less on the politics of the policies behind the different restrictions, and I think there's a lot of opportunities there. But I think in these graphs you do see that spike in traffic controls. The red is bans on all regions or total border closure, and then the green and going up towards the top are looser travel controls. When this report comes out next year, I think you're going to see all of them drop down, and the vast majority being blue by the end of 2022, 2023. But then who knows what might happen before then. But what we've seen is that initial rush to shut down in March and April, and then a gradual decline or loosening of controls, which has an effect on international migration. I know Australia has fallen behind on its migrant arrivals, and other countries have as well, and that's reflected, of course, because most migrants travel by air, in the decline in air passengers in that short period from 2019, to 2020. So I think those are just a couple of initial trends. The gender breakdown between male and female is different in different regions around the world. The number of migrants are going up, and the COVID restrictions, as well as the ability, those restrictions limit people from being able to move around the world, is going to have an effect on the behaviors that we're going to look at later on in this lecture. So let's end there and turn towards our first type, or the main types of forced migration, refugees and internally displaced people.